William Mercer was a man to whom little things meant everything. Over 20 years of working as a police officer, he had developed the ability to notice even the smallest details that escape most people's eyes. He called this ability his gift, although he cursed it more than once for not giving him peace. He could identify a liar by a barely noticeable twitch of the corner of his lips, a thief by the nervous gesture with which he touched his pocket, and a murderer by a cold glance that slipped at the most inopportune moment. But in everyday life, outside interrogation rooms and dark alleys, this gift often became his curse, especially now. Jessica, his wife, the woman he loved, protected, and shared his life with for 15 years. She had always been his safe haven, a place where he could relax and let go of the tension accumulated over long shifts. Her care was natural, without feigned affection or feigned sympathy. William was accustomed to relying on her in the same way he relied on his trusty Smith & Wesson, his intuition, and the worn-out notebook in which the most important notes on business were kept. But something has changed. He felt it in his gut. It all started with little things. Jessica began to spend more time in the bathroom, stay late at work, speak in vague phrases, and avoid his gaze. Of course, this could be attributed to fatigue, stress, anything. Any other husband might not have paid attention, but not him. Old habits die hard, and his instincts, honed by years of service, began to ring alarm bells. That evening, when he returned home, Jessica was standing at the stove, stirring the sauce in the pan. She was wearing her old sweater, slightly elongated at the sleeves, and skinny jeans. Her hair was casually pulled back into a high ponytail, with a few strands escaping and framing her face. Everything looked as usual, almost. "Hi," she said without even turning to him. "How is the day?" "Long," he answered briefly, looking closely at her movements. It would seem like an ordinary evening, an ordinary conversation. But something was wrong. He felt it. He knew her too well. "What's for dinner?" he asked, coming closer and involuntarily inhaling her scent. Perfume. New. A light, floral scent that didn't go with her usual vanilla perfume, which he gave her for every anniversary. This was warning sign number 1. "Pasta with chicken. Your favorite recipe." She smiled, but her gaze slid past him. Alarm number 2. He nodded, took a glass of wine from the table, and took a sip. Then he carefully placed his hand on her waist, as he always did when he came home. She tensed slightly, almost imperceptibly. Almost. Alarm number 3. "Don't stress yourself out," he ordered himself. Maybe it's just fatigue. Maybe she's worried about something. But his inner voice, that damn inner voice that had saved him countless times, said otherwise. He decided not to ask questions for now. Old habits taught him that if he waited, the truth would come out on its own. Cracks began to appear in their once strong, if not flawless, marriage. William noticed changes that might have seemed insignificant to others, but were obvious to him. Jessica was increasingly late home, explaining this by sudden meetings or the need to stop at the store. Sometimes she would retire to the bathroom longer than usual, and when she came out, she would quickly hide the phone in her pocket or put it face down. He tried to convince himself that this was just paranoia, a professional deformation. But deep down, I knew something had changed. One evening, he decided to check her phone, but Jessica took it with her even to the shower. It wasn't like her. He remembered how she used to calmly leave it on the kitchen table or in the bedroom. Now the gadget has become her integral companion. One night, while lying in bed, William listened to her breathing. Jessica was sleeping, but her face looked tired. He remembered their first years together, carefree trips, long conversations over dinner, light touches that were natural and not forced like now. He wanted to believe he was wrong, that he is simply too tired and looking for problems where there are none. But the detective instinct, honed by years of service, sounded the alarm. Jessica became interested in yoga and increasingly talked about her new teacher, Michael. Her eyes sparkled with interest as she spoke of his methods, attentiveness, and incredible charisma. William couldn't help but notice how easily and delightedly she pronounced his name. At first, he didn't attach much importance to it. It seemed to him that Jessica had simply found a way to relax after long days at work. But the more he listened to her stories, the more alarmed he was by the manner in which she mentioned Michael. It seemed that her voice was changing, becoming softer, warmer, even dreamier. One day at dinner, she started talking about yoga again. Today, Michael showed us an amazing balance exercise. You can't imagine what it feels like to be completely at one with your body and mind, she said, looking into space as if immersed in memories. William frowned. Michael, have you already switched to you? His voice sounded calmer than he actually felt. Jessica tensed slightly, but quickly smiled. Well, he is a very open person. Everyone in the group just calls him Michael. He insists on it. It's part of his philosophy, trust, and equality, she explained, brushing off his remark. Interesting philosophy, William noted dryly, taking a sip of wine. How often do you have classes? 3 times a week, but Michael sometimes conducts additional classes for those who want to go deeper into the practice. Her voice sounded like it was a special invitation. Are you planning to participate? He tried to maintain a neutral tone. Perhaps. She looked at him as if gauging his reaction. Michael believes that I have good potential, and he suggested that I try personal training. The fork in William's hand froze. Personal lessons. This is something new. Yes, she nodded casually. He says I have the capacity for deep relaxation and wants to help me discover it. Amazing, William muttered, putting down his fork. Jess, are you sure this is just a yoga class? She put the knife down and looked at him with slight irritation. What are you talking about? Of course, these are just activities. Why are you reacting this way? Maybe because you talk about him with such admiration that you haven't talked about me for a long time, he said quietly, looking intently into her eyes. Jessica looked away and began to collect the dishes from the table. You're screwing yourself over again, William. Maybe you should just try to relax. Maybe yoga would benefit you too. Perhaps, but only if my teacher is someone other than this charming Michael, he answered dryly. William had no reason to be jealous yet, but deep down he understood. Michael was not just a teacher, but a possible threat to their family. Every day his suspicions grew stronger, although he could not find concrete evidence. He noticed that Jessica began to spend more time outside the home. Now she has evening classes, additional training and discussions on the spiritual path. She had never been so into something like this before. One evening, he decided to go after her without warning. Jessica's car was parked at the entrance to the yoga center. The lights inside were dim. He remained in the shadows, watching as she emerged an hour later, laughing with Michael. Their conversation was casual, but in the movements of her body, there was a lightness that he had not seen in their house for a long time. Hey, detective, what are you doing here? He heard a familiar voice behind him. It was his partner, Tom Harris, who was just passing by. I'm just breathing fresh air, William answered reluctantly, continuing to watch his wife. Tom looked at him with understanding. If you think something is wrong, then maybe you should check this Michael guy out more closely. You know, everyone has skeletons in their closet. At a party organized by Ashley, Jessica's best friend, William saw Michael in person for the first time. He didn't know what to expect, but he was prepared for any development of events. However, even his detective experience could not prepare him for what he saw. Michael moved around the room with the confidence of a predator, as if every step he took was calculated in advance. His voice sounded even, and his smile was impeccably relaxed. He wasn't just the center of attention, he was the source of it. People reached out to him, men nodded respectfully, and women laughed a little louder than usual. William involuntarily squeezed the whiskey glass in his hand. He watched as Jessica walked up to Michael, who lightly placed his hand on her shoulder, speaking into her ear. She laughed, throwing her head back. It was her laugh, one that he had not heard for a long time. Buddy, why are you looking at me like that? Came the voice of Tom Harris, his partner, who, by a strange coincidence, also happened to be at the party. I'm just looking, William answered calmly, without taking his eyes off Michael. Well, he is, of course, charismatic, but you know that appearance is only the tip of the iceberg. Would you like me to check it just in case? Tom suggested, leaning back on the bar counter. William thought about it. His intuition told him that Michael was not just a person who loved yoga. There was something wrong about him. Perhaps it was worth finding out more about him. Do it, he said shortly, before turning his gaze back to his wife, who was still standing next to Michael, deep in conversation. Jessica laughed, leaning a little closer to Michael, and he looked at her as if this was the most interesting woman in the world. William couldn't remember the last time he saw her like this. It burned him from the inside. "What do you think about him?" Tom suddenly asked, carefully watching his friend's reaction. "He's too perfect, too flawless." "I don't believe in people like that," William said, taking a sip of whiskey. "Are you jealous?" Tom grinned. "I'm checking the facts," William replied dryly. Meanwhile, Ashley approached them, holding a glass of wine in her hand. "Hello, boys. Why so serious?" she asked, smiling slyly. "Just discussing Michael," Tom replied before William could say anything. Ashley nodded, clearly expecting such a conversation. "He's good, isn't he? An excellent teacher, a wonderful conversationalist. I'm not surprised Jessica appreciates him so much." "Do you appreciate it?" William asked, narrowing his eyes. "Certainly. He gave her confidence, strength. She has become different. You can see it yourself, right?" Ashley looked at him searchingly. "Yes, I see," he answered, piercing her with his gaze. At that moment, Michael turned in their direction, noticing that they were discussing him. He smiled slightly, raised his glass, and walked towards them. Jessica seemed too animated while laughing at Michael's jokes. Her eyes shone, and her voice sounded loud, as if it awakened in her that lightness that had long faded away in the family routine. William watched them, his fingers gripping his glass tightly. He didn't want to admit it, but his irritation was growing every minute. Michael casually leaned over and lightly touched Jessica's shoulder. It was a fleeting gesture, but for William it became an alarm signal. Something primal and unconscious flared up inside. His jaw clenched and his breathing became a little deeper. "Just look at them," said a quiet voice behind him. "Yes, too close," someone else answered. William caught this phrase, and it was like a spark hit the dry straw. There was a fire inside. The overheard whispers of the guests added fuel to the fire. He couldn't just stand and watch anymore. Taking a deep breath, he walked closer, stopping just a few steps away from them. Jessica and Michael didn't notice him right away. He carefully watched their facial expressions, every movement. "Good joke?" he asked quietly, looking straight into Michael's eyes. Jessica shuddered slightly, and Michael just grinned without looking away. "Yes, William, just a harmless conversation," he replied, smiling cheekily. "Talk?" William asked, tilting his head. "Do you touch women that often during conversation, Michael?" "I didn't know they were interviewing me," Michael chuckled. "Relax, William, you're too tense." "William, what's wrong with you?" Jessica intervened, her voice trembling. "What's wrong with me?" He narrowed his eyes. "Jess, can you even hear yourself? You laugh at his every word. You let him touch you. This is fine?" "You're being ridiculous." Jessica crossed her arms over her chest. "These are just jokes. Are you sure?" William turned his gaze to Michael. "Because from the outside it doesn't look like just friendly fun." Michael folded his arms across his chest, his gaze remaining calm. "William, I'm not trying to hide anything. If you don't like something, we can discuss it like adults and not make a scene in front of the guests." "Adults?" William snorted. "How convenient. Only adults respect other people's boundaries." Jessica sighed irritably. "I don't understand where all this comes from." Her voice became firmer. "Are you jealous of a person who is just trying to be kind? Maybe because you behave with him the way you haven't behaved with me for a long time." William blurted out, surprised at his own abruptness. Several guests fell silent when they heard the raised tone. There was a painful pause. Michael leaned a little closer to William and said quietly, "If you have problems in your marriage, maybe you should solve them, rather than looking for someone to blame from the outside." William clenched his fists, but restrained himself. This was not the moment to lose control. "I'll figure it out, Michael." His voice was cold. "Just stay away from my wife." "I don't dictate to Jessica who she communicates with," Michael answered calmly. "Maybe you should ask her what she wants." Jessica gave William a look full of irritation and resentment. He saw the challenge in her eyes. "Maybe, really," she said, crossing her arms. "Maybe it's not about Michael, but the fact that you haven't tried to really see me for a long time." They returned home in oppressive silence. The only sound in the car was the sound of the engine, and even the radio that usually played in the background was turned off today. Jessica sat looking out the window, her lips pressed into a thin line and her arms crossed over her chest. William held the steering wheel tightly, his eyes fixed on the road, but his thoughts ran in different directions. They entered the house. Jessica took off her shoes and walked into the bedroom without saying a word. William remained in the corridor, undoing the buttons on the collar of his shirt. He didn't know how to start a conversation, and was there any point in it now? A wall grew between them, and every day it became higher. The sound of water from the shower. Jessica chose to retire, as if making it clear that the discussion had been postponed indefinitely. William sighed, walked into the living room, and poured himself a glass of whiskey. The sip burned my throat, but could not drown out the bitterness in my soul. He sat down on the sofa, staring into space. He remembered the times when their house was filled with laughter, when Jessica looked at him with warmth in her eyes instead of cold indifference. What went wrong? He couldn't say for sure, but he knew that Michael was not just part of this story, but the catalyst for their slow destruction. The minutes dragged on painfully long. Jessica came out of the shower and walked past without taking a single glance. William turned his head, wanting to say something, but the words were stuck in his throat. She disappeared into the bedroom, leaving him alone with the silence, which became increasingly heavier. The phone call came at 3 o'clock in the morning. A dull, sharp sound broke the silence that enveloped the bedroom. William flinched, but did not immediately understand where the ringing was coming from. His consciousness was still balancing on the edge of sleep and reality. The weight of the night's numbness constrained his body. There was a thick, tense silence in the air. Jessica, who was lying next to her, did not even move. Her breathing remained even and deep. The ringing continued, insistent and loud, piercing my ears, forcing my heart to speed up its rhythm. William reluctantly reached out to the bedside table, his fingers feeling the cool surface of the phone. He brought it to his ear and, clearing his throat, squeezed out hoarsely. "Hello?" The voice on the other end of the line was low and tense. "William, this is Tony. We need your help." At that same second, the remnant of sleep completely evaporated from his consciousness. The colleague's name flashed into my memory, breaking through an alarming window in the darkness of my mind. He sat up on the bed, clutching his phone with one hand and mechanically removing the blanket from his lap with the other. "What's happened?" His voice was harsh. "Ashley." The voice trailed off for a moment, as if Tony didn't know how to say it out loud. "She was found dead in her apartment." There was a long, painful pause. In that moment, thousands of thoughts flashed through William's head. What's happened? Trouble? Accident? His fingers tightened their grip on the phone, and his heart sank with foreboding. "This is murder," Tony continued, giving William a second to process what he had heard. "We need you to come as soon as possible." The call ended, but William's hand still clutched the phone for a long time. He sat in the dark, feeling panic rising within him. For several seconds, he just sat there, unable to move. My head throbbed with tension, and my chest was filled with dull fear. Memories of his last meeting with Ashley flashed through his mind, but his thoughts were confused, as if his mind refused to accept the reality of what was happening. He stood up abruptly, forcing himself to act. There was a cold parquet under his feet, but he didn't even feel it. The whole body was filled with heaviness. He stepped towards the closet, hastily pulling on jeans and a shirt. Jessica was still sleeping, her silhouette faintly visible in the darkness of the room. He didn't want to wake her. Not now. The minutes dragged on agonizingly long until he finally left the house and got into the car. He started the engine, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The silence of the night spread outside the window. The streets were empty. The streetlights cast long shadows on the wet asphalt. He didn't notice when it started to rain. Headlights cut through the darkness as the car took off. Everything inside was compressed from misunderstanding, from the need to get answers. He couldn't believe what he heard, but he knew one thing for sure: that night something changed forever. William drove up to Ashley's house and, without even turning off the engine, jumped out of the car. The rain, which until recently had only been a light drizzle, now poured from the sky, crashing against the hood of his car. Yellow police tape stretched across the entrance, cutting off the house from the outside world. Several patrol cars were parked near the porch, their flashing lights casting ominous reflections on the wet asphalt. He quickly walked to the front door, where Detective Tony Harris was already waiting for him. He stood under a small canopy, hiding his cigarette from the rain. Seeing William, he nodded and put out his cigarette. "You're fast," Harris noted, throwing back his hood. His hair was damp, and he had a serious expression on his face. "Come on, come in. We have something to discuss." They entered the house. The air was heavy, filled with a strange mixture of women's perfume and a metallic taste. The room where the body was located was brightly lit, but even the light could not banish the gloomy atmosphere of death. The outline of a body outlined in white chalk was still visible on the floor. Next to him lay a silk scarf, neatly folded, as if someone had deliberately left it in plain sight. "Is this hers?" William asked, pointing to the scarf. Harris nodded. "The same one she wore to the party." William felt his insides tighten. He did not yet fully understand what had happened, but one thing was clear: this murder was carefully planned. William was standing near the chalk outline of a body when more footsteps were heard in the house. He turned around and saw Jessica appear in the doorway. Her face was pale, her eyes were wide open, and her breathing was ragged. The rain had soaked her coat, and her hair was sticking to her forehead, but she didn't seem to notice. "Oh my God," she whispered barely audibly, covering her mouth with her hand. Her legs gave way, and if it weren't for Harris, who was nearby, she would have collapsed to the floor. Who did this?" she asked in a choked voice, looking from her husband to the detective. "We don't know yet, but I promise we will find out," Harris replied, taking a step back, leaving the couple alone. Jessica sobbed, walked over to William with difficulty, and clung tightly to his hand. Her shoulders were shaking, tears flowed down her cheeks, dripping onto the stained carpet. "She was my friend, my best friend." The sobs became louder. How could this happen? William didn't know what to say. He felt a wave of impotent anger rising in his chest, but now it was more important to calm his wife. He hugged her, letting her tears fall onto his shoulder. "We will find out the truth, Jess. I promise." William stood in the center of the room, watching as forensic scientists methodically photographed the crime scene. There was a faint smell of expensive perfume in the air, mixed with something metallic. In the corner of the room, next to the coffee table, was the guest list for the party Ashley was throwing that night. The sheets of paper were slightly crumpled, as if someone had been holding them in their hands, wondering what to do with them. Detective Harris approached William, holding the same list in his hands. His face was impenetrable, but tension was visible in his eyes. "We asked the neighbors," he said, crossing his arms over his chest. His voice was level, but there was a hint of wariness in it. "They heard a noise around midnight, but no one paid any attention to it. One witness claims to have seen a man enter Ashley's apartment late at night. He was described as tall, well-dressed, and confident." William frowned as he ran his eyes down the list. He slowly ran his finger over the names, reading each one as if trying to find a clue among them. Michael's name did appear among the guests. It was not noticeable, but now it seems more significant than before. "We need to find out why he came so late," William said decisively. His voice sounded firm, but something inside did not give him peace. Harris nodded silently, thoughtfully drumming his fingers on the cover of his notebook. "The security cameras in the entrance could have recorded something," he said after a few seconds. "If he really came in at that time, we will have confirmation." One of the officers nodded and left, heading towards the security of the building. The others continued to methodically inspect the apartment. The silence became almost suffocating, broken only by the rustle of forensic gloves and the faint crackle of lamps. William walked around the room, looking at Ashley's things. Everything here seemed so familiar, but at the same time alien. He touched the back of the sofa where they had once sat, talking about the most ordinary things. Now this moment seemed incredibly far away. A few minutes later, an officer appeared at the door holding a tablet. His face expressed professional reserve, but there was a slight tension in his eyes. "We managed to get the recording from the camera," he said, handing the tablet to William. An image of the entrance appeared on the screen. The door opened and a man stepped into the opening. He froze for a second, looking around, then quickly disappeared into the building. William held his breath, peering at the familiar silhouette. "Recording time is 23:47, the officer added. He didn't linger at the entrance, but immediately went upstairs. William and Detective Harris sat in the small, cozy living room, lined with bookshelves and decorated with old framed photographs. Opposite them, in a rocking chair, sat an elderly woman, Mrs. Grayson, Ashley's neighbor. Her thin fingers fiddled with a mug of cooled tea, and her eyes were full of concern. "I knew that sooner or later something would happen," she said with a quiet sigh. Ashley was a good girl, but she always had secrets. William listened attentively without interrupting. Recently, a man often came to see her. Tall, respectable, with thick dark hair, and he left only in the morning. Harris nodded, jotting down the details on his notepad. "Have you seen his face?" William asked, pulling out several photographs from the folder. These were photographs of party guests taken from surveillance cameras. Mrs. Grayson squinted at the photographs, then her finger twitched, pointing to one of the images. "It's him," she said firmly. "This is the man. I remembered him." William looked at the photo. It was Michael. A quick, knowing glance passed between the detectives. Now they had something concrete. Now this was not just a rumor or a guess. It was evidence that could turn the course of the investigation. With every new piece of evidence that came to light during the investigation, William felt his professional instincts sharpen. He no longer just suspected Michael, he saw him as a danger. Every night before he went to sleep, his thoughts returned to the scenes from the security cameras, to the neighbors' statements, to the expression on Mrs. Grayson's face when she identified him in the photograph. Something was bothering him. Intuition, developed over years of service, suggested that this was not just Ashley's casual lover. Perhaps he is something much more sinister. William began to dig deeper. He ran a database search, checking for any possible connections between Michael and other violent incidents. It turned out that he changed his place of residence several times over the past 10 years. Meetings with colleagues became increasingly tense. Harris, accustomed to trusting logic and facts, was skeptical of his partner's suspicions. "You're digging too deep, William," he said, leaning back in his department chair. "One affair, even a secret one, does not make a person a murderer." "And if he does?" William replied, staring intently at the screen where the security camera footage was playing over and over again. There was a growing feeling inside that he was missing something important. He decided to continue searching. Now for him, this was not just an investigation. It got personal. William became completely immersed in the investigation. His every morning began with checking recordings from cameras installed near Michael's house and analyzing his routes. He followed him by visiting the yoga studio where he worked, pretending to be a new client. I studied his behavior, looking for clues that could confirm his guesses. He spent his nights delving into Michael's past. Through connections in the police, he gained access to archival cases, carefully studying every case where his suspect could appear. The deeper he dug, the stronger the feeling became that Michael was not just Ashley's lover. One evening, when William was once again about to walk out the door, Jessica blocked his way. "William, wait. We need to talk." "Not now, Jess," he sighed, not wanting to waste time talking. Damn it, not now. Anger rang in her voice. Do you even notice what's going on in this house? You come, take a shower, drink coffee, and disappear. I don't even remember the last time we had dinner together. William ran his hand over his face, fatigue falling heavily on him. I'm close to the solution. I need a little more time. Time? Jessica smiled bitterly. You've been saying that for the last 3 weeks. You hunt this person like your life depends on it. Maybe so, he answered gloomily. She froze, looking him straight in the eyes. Can you even hear yourself? You are not an investigator. You are an obsessed person. William, you are no longer my husband. You are just a shadow living in this house. He looked away. Deep down, he knew she was right. But stop. No, that was impossible. I have to go, he said quietly, avoiding her gaze. If you leave now, her voice trembled. I don't know if I'll stay here when you come back. He froze for a moment, his fingers clenching on the doorknob. I wanted to say something, but the words couldn't be found. Take care of yourself, Jess. He finally exhaled and walked out into the night. The rain outside the window drummed on the glass, reflecting the anxiety that she could no longer hide. Jessica sat on the edge of the bed with her arms crossed over her chest. Her eyes followed William, who was quickly getting ready, pulling on his shirt and not looking at her. Are you leaving again? Her voice was even, but there was disappointment in it. I have work, Jess, he answered briefly, fastening the watch on his wrist. Job, she smiled bitterly. You don't just work anymore, you live this investigation. You only come home to sleep, and sometimes you don't even do that. William sighed, trying not to lose his temper. Jess, I'm trying to figure this case out. It's important. I thought you would understand. She stood up, crossing her arms over her chest. Do you understand? Don't you notice what's going on around you at all? You haven't looked at me for a long time. You haven't asked how my day was. And when I try to talk to you, you just brush me off. William ran his hand over his face, feeling growing fatigue. It's not about us, Jessica. Now is not the time for this. When will the time be, William? When will you finally forget that you have a family? He looked at her silently, not knowing what to answer. Something inside him told him that Jessica was also not telling her something. Lately, he has increasingly caught her getting nervous and avoiding his gaze. Was it because of him, or something else? She slumped her shoulders, disappointment giving way to bitterness. If you want to continue to live only in this matter, fine. But don't expect me to just watch this in silence. Jessica turned around and left the room, leaving William alone with his thoughts and his growing suspicion. William parked near the yoga studio where Michael worked. He sat in the car, watching the entrance, trying to remain unnoticed. Inner restlessness haunted him, and not only because of Michael. In recent days, he felt that Jessica was hiding something, but he couldn't figure out what it was. When he finally decided to leave and enter the studio, his gaze was frozen on the glass doors. Inside, among a group of exercisers, he saw Jessica. She moved smoothly, gracefully performing the exercises, and laughed in response to something Michael said. Even earlier, he knew that Jessica had signed up for yoga, but seeing her here, in the company of Michael, was a completely different feeling. She looked relaxed, engaged, almost content. William clenched his jaw, feeling a cold suspicion rise in his chest. He walked inside slowly, trying to remain calm. However, everything was boiling inside. Jessica noticed him first. Her eyes widened, but instead of guilt, a slight grin flashed across her face. William, she asked in surprise, brushing a strand of hair from her face. What are you doing here? I'm working, he answered briefly, turning his gaze to Michael, who stood nearby, wiping sweat from his neck with a towel. And you? I decided to go to classes more often. Jessica smiled and cast a short glance at Michael. I like it here. Michael smiled back, clearly enjoying the situation. Jessica is a very capable student, he noted, grinning. He learns quickly. William felt his fingers involuntarily clenching into fists. The words sounded simple, but the tone in which they were spoken only increased suspicion. I'd like to talk to you later, he said, looking straight into her eyes. Jessica just raised her eyebrows slightly. Of course, William, always happy to talk. Jessica returned home late. She quietly closed the door, put her bag on the floor, and took a deep breath, trying to collect her thoughts. But as soon as she took a step towards the kitchen, William's voice came from the darkness. "It's late for yoga, isn't it?" She started, turned on the light, and saw him. He sat at the table, crossing his arms over his chest, and looked at her carefully. The look is cold, intense. "What do you mean?" she asked carefully, taking off her jacket. "You stay late after class too often. You spend too much time in the studio. What's going on, Jessica?" She rolled her eyes and headed towards the refrigerator. "Are you following me?" There was irritation in her voice. "Do I need to explain where I go and what I do?" "Maybe yes," he answered harshly, "because I'm not sure I know the truth anymore." Jessica abruptly closed the refrigerator door, turned to him, and flushed. "Do you think I'm sleeping with Michael?" Her voice broke into a scream. "This is what you believe in." She grabbed the plate from the table and threw it at the wall with all her strength. The porcelain shattered into pieces, echoing off the walls. William didn't move. He just looked at her, silently, coldly. Everything was boiling inside him, but he knew, if he said a word, something could happen that could no longer be corrected. "I'm not lying to you, William," she hissed, breathing heavily. "But you seem to have already decided for me." He stood up slowly, leaning his hands on the table. "You act like you have a reason to lie." Jessica looked at him with pain and anger, then turned around and left the kitchen, leaving behind only broken dishes and air filled with mistrust. The house became quiet, too quiet. William and Jessica didn't argue anymore, but they didn't talk either. They lived in the same space, but as if in parallel realities. Jessica tried not to meet his gaze, spending evenings in the bedroom or on the veranda, and William was increasingly late at work. The kitchen table, where long conversations had once taken place, now resembled a cold, lifeless place. Jessica cried often. He heard her in the next room, heard how she tried to muffle her sobs, but they still penetrated the walls. He knew she was crying for Ashley, for the friend she lost, for the fact that their world was destroyed. One night he couldn't stand it anymore. He walked up to the bedroom and stood at the slightly open door. The light from the bedside lamp illuminated her silhouette. She was sitting on the bed, clutching a photograph in her hands. He wanted to say something, but the words got stuck in his throat. She didn't even turn around. "You miss her too, right?" Her voice was weak, but filled with pain. He sighed and ran his hand over his face. "Yes." "Then why do we act like we hate each other?" She looked at him, and there was so much pain in her gaze that he involuntarily looked away. He didn't know the answer. Everything that was between them turned into walls, and none of them could decide to destroy them. It was an ordinary day, if you could call it that, in their house, filled with tense silence. William felt the distance growing between them, but could not decide whether to overcome it. Everything changed by chance. He was looking for his jacket in Jessica's car. She always grumbled about him leaving things around, and he wouldn't be surprised if she just put it in the trunk. Opening the door and looking inside, he leaned over to the passenger seat and noticed something stuck between the door and the upholstery. A piece of paper, folded in half, crumpled, as if it had been squeezed in the palm of your hand. Smoothing out the note, he read the words that made his heart beat faster. "Meet me at midnight. Don't tell anyone. M." His first instinct was to convince himself that it didn't mean anything. Maybe this is someone's prank. Maybe the note accidentally got into the car. But his mind was already putting the pieces together. M is for Michael. It couldn't be anyone else. William felt a dull rage growing in his chest. All his suspicions were confirmed. All her late returns, quarrels, avoidances from conversations, all this now seemed no coincidence. He clenched the note in his fist, trying to control his anger. A hurricane raged inside. He remembered her smile in the yoga studio, her flirting with Michael, and everything was boiling inside him. The question is what to do next. Come to the meeting. Make her tell the truth. Openly demand an explanation. That evening he could think of nothing else. His gaze slid to the clock every now and then. Every tick reminded me that the time was approaching. Midnight. Meeting. Was she really going to do this? When Jessica returned home, he greeted her with a cold gaze. She took off her jacket, threw her bag, and tiredly rubbed her temples. William couldn't sleep. After finding the note, thoughts swirled in his head, giving him no peace. He watched as Jessica changed clothes, threw on a dark jacket, and took out her keys. She didn't even glance in his direction as she quietly walked out the door. He didn't need to think twice. He immediately stood up, grabbed his jacket, and followed her. In the shadows of the courtyards, he kept his distance, barely hearing her steps. She moved confidently, as if she knew where she was going. About 20 minutes later, she stopped at an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. William's heart began to beat wildly. He expected to see Michael, but instead a tall, hooded figure appeared in the light of the lantern. Stranger. Jessica stepped towards her, looking around tensely. "Are you sure no one was watching?" The woman's voice was low, almost a whisper. "Yes," Jessica answered, but her voice was shaking. William pressed himself against the wall, listening to the conversation. "Everything is getting out of control," the stranger continued. "Has he already begun to suspect?" "Yes, but I—" Jessica paused, as if searching for words. "I can't tell him. Not now." The stranger leaned closer. Her voice became almost pleading. "Don't tell the truth." Jessica took a deep breath. William saw her hands clenched into fists. He didn't know what was going on, but he knew one thing. His wife was clearly hiding something, and it had nothing to do with Michael. What truth is she afraid to tell? William couldn't leave things as they were. After Jessica's one-night meeting with the mysterious woman, he felt that the truth was out there, but he had no proof. His mind demanded answers, and his intuition suggested that the stranger played a key role in this whole mystery, so he decided to follow her. The next morning, he returned to the warehouse again. Remaining in the car, he waited patiently, watching the entrance. The long hours of surveillance were exhausting, but William got used to the waiting. Around noon, the woman appeared again. She was wearing the same hooded jacket, but now she moved more confidently. She looked around, making sure no one was watching her, and went inside. William wasted no time. He got out of the car, took the camera off his shoulder, and carefully took a few pictures. Her face was partially hidden by the hood, but he managed to catch a good angle. He photographed her profile, her gait, even her hands, on one of which he noticed a thin silver bracelet. This bracelet seemed familiar to him, but he could not remember where he had seen it before. After waiting for her to come out, he continued surveillance. The woman headed to the cafe, ordered coffee, and sat down at the farm table. William took a place nearby, hiding behind a newspaper. He took a few more pictures as she removed her hood. Now her face was clearly visible. Something in her features seemed familiar to him, but he could not immediately understand what it was. Her eyes, the shape of her cheekbones, the movement of her lips. He had already seen this face somewhere. He sent the photos to the police database, but had to wait for the results. While the system was processing the images, he remembered that Ashley had once told him about her missing sister. She said that Lisa disappeared suddenly, leaving behind only a few old things and a mysterious note, the meaning of which no one could unravel. The case was then considered unrelated to the crime and closed. Returning to the department, he again uploaded the photos to the database. The system analyzed the image for several minutes, and then a name appeared before his eyes: Lisa Morris. He felt everything turn inside him. Lisa, Ashley's sister, a woman who was declared missing 3 years ago. But if she is alive, then why is she hiding? Why is he dating Jessica secretly? Why didn't you contact the police? He began to dig deeper, checking the archives. It turned out that Lisa was involved in several suspicious cases, but was never declared a criminal. She disappeared a few days after she began dating a man who has never been identified. Now William knew one thing: he urgently needed to talk to her. Perhaps this meeting will give him answers to all his questions, or will reveal a new, even more frightening truth. William knew he couldn't put off this conversation any longer. Lisa had been hiding for too long, and her appearance in this story could not have been accidental. He contacted her through Jessica, passing a note suggesting they meet in a quiet place where no one would disturb her. They met in an old park outside the city in a secluded gazebo, hidden from prying eyes. Lisa came in a hood, clearly not wanting to be noticed. William immediately felt the tension coming from her. "I knew you were hiding for a reason," he began, crossing his arms over his chest. "Explain, Lisa. What are you doing here?" She took a deep breath and looked him straight in the eyes. "I came back to stop Michael," she said firmly. "He is not what he seems. You already guessed that something was wrong with him, didn't you?" William frowned. "I have suspicions, but I need evidence, not guesses." Lisa nodded and clenched her hands nervously. "Michael is part of a secret society," she continued. "They remove unwanted people by staging accidents. I found out about this 3 years ago, and that's why I disappeared. They tried to remove me, but I managed to escape." William shook his head in disbelief. "Do you realize how crazy this sounds?" "I understand," Lisa answered. "But I have proof, records, documents. It took me a long time to collect them. I need you to help me." He looked at her carefully. There was no hysteria in her voice, only confidence and fear. "Where is this evidence?" he asked. Lisa hesitated, then exhaled. "In a safe place. I'll give them to you, but only if you promise that you won't do anything until you know the whole truth." William hesitated, but then nodded. "Okay, show me what you have." "We need to leave," she whispered. "It's not safe here." But William shook his head. "No, Lisa, I need the truth. Now." She took a deep breath, gathering her courage. Ashley found out who Michael really is. She found documents confirming that he was connected with the mysterious disappearances of people who were officially considered to have died in accidents. She wanted to reveal it, but didn't have time. "Are you saying," William's voice became hoarse, "that she was killed because she knew too much?" Lisa nodded. "Yes, and now Michael realized that Jessica was also beginning to suspect something. I saw him watching her. He can do the same to her." William was overcome with anger and fear. He had long suspected that his wife was in danger, but now everything came together into a single picture. "We need proof, Lisa," he said, looking her straight in the eyes. "If we want to stop him, we have to have something that can't be disputed." Lisa nodded quickly and took out a flash drive from her pocket. "Here, Ashley collected this information before her death. She thought it would save her, but—" She fell silent, but William already understood everything. He squeezed the flash drive in his hand, feeling the adrenaline pulsing. "Now we know the truth," he said quietly. "The question is, how do we use it before it's too late?" Lisa looked at him with despair. "I was afraid that no one would believe me," she admitted. "That's why I hid. That's why I returned only now." "Why did you tell everything to Jessica and not me?" William asked sharply. "Because I knew you would think I just ran away 3 years ago," she whispered. "I needed someone to help me from the inside." "And you chose Jessica," he nodded slowly. "Do you even understand how you put her at risk by doing this?" "I understand, but there was no other way out," Lisa exclaimed. "I saw Michael watching her. I heard him mention her name. William, he already realized that she knows something." William tensed. Everything inside was shrinking from one thought. Michael could be closer than he thought. "If we don't stop him now," he said, squeezing the flash drive even tighter, "then Jessica could repeat Ashley's fate." "That's why we need to work together," Lisa stated firmly. "Do you trust me?" He looked at her for a long time and then nodded slowly. "I have no choice." William sat in the darkness of his car, looking at the flickering lights of the street. His mind was overloaded with thoughts. Until this moment, he was sure that Jessica was lying to him, hiding something, perhaps even betraying him. But now the puzzle began to take shape differently. Every late departure, every meeting with Michael, every anxious expression on her face, it all took on a new meaning. She didn't cheat. She tried to help. She knew Ashley had learned something dangerous and was trying to get to the bottom of the truth. He took a deep breath and rubbed his temples. All this time he thought that Jessica had betrayed him. But he was wrong. Instead of trusting her, he only pushed her away and succumbed to jealousy and anger. The question was it too late? William sat in the living room, lost in thought. Thoughts about Jessica, her motives and possible dangers were running through her head like a broken record. He barely had time to take a sip of whiskey when there was a sharp knock on the door. The knocking was repeated, louder, more insistent. William frowned, put his glass on the table, and headed towards the entrance. Opening the door, he saw David, Ashley's husband, on the threshold. His face was pale and his eyes burned with a feverish fire. His breathing was uneven, and the hand holding the gun trembled slightly. "You knew!" David almost shouted, looking over William's shoulder to where Jessica stood. "You knew she was cheating, and you didn't do anything. You could have saved her." Jessica took a step back in fright, her face turning pale. William immediately raised his hands, trying to calm David down. "David, put the weapon down," he said in a firm but calm voice. "Let's talk." "What is there to talk about?" David's voice trembled with rage and pain. "Ashley is dead. If you, Jessica, had told me the truth earlier, maybe I could have done something." "David, listen to me," Jessica began, her voice trembling slightly, but there was no fear in it. "Everything was not as you think. I tried to help her, but I didn't have time." "Don't you dare make excuses," he barked, taking a step forward. "You knew and were silent. You let her live a lie." William understood that the situation was on the brink. One wrong move, and it could end in tragedy. He slowly, without sudden movements, extended his hand forward. "I know how you feel, David," he said. "You are angry. You have lost a loved one. But this is not a solution. Let's sit down and discuss everything. We are also looking for answers." David's eyes narrowed, his chest heaving. He slowly looked from William to Jessica, then back to the gun in his hand. "You can't even imagine what it's like." His voice became quieter, but there was frantic pain in it, living with the idea that you could have changed something, but didn't. Jessica took a deep breath and stepped forward, her voice becoming softer. "David, I didn't want it to turn out like this. I loved Ashley. She was like a sister to me. Believe me, if I had known how this would all turn out, I would have done everything to protect her." David's finger loosened its grip on the trigger slightly, but his gaze was still filled with despair. "If you're lying," he whispered, gritting his teeth, "I won't leave it like this." The living room was filled with tense silence. David was breathing heavily, his hand holding the gun was still shaking, but he began to come to his senses. Jessica froze in the corner of the room, not taking her eyes off him. William slowly lowered his hands, hoping that the conflict was about to subside. But the next second, there was the sound of a lock being picked. The door swung open with a deafening crash, and Michael burst into the room. His gaze was wild, and a knife glinted in his hand. "Where is she?" he barked, looking around the room. William immediately turned around, shielding Jessica with himself. David sharply raised the gun, pointing it at the new guest. "What the hell are you doing?" William barked. "Where is Lisa?" Michael stepped forward, squeezing the knife even tighter. "I know she's back. You are hiding it." Jessica sobbed, pressing herself against the wall. David looked from Michael to William, waiting for his reaction. "You're crazy." William took a step forward. "Put the knife down and tell me what you need." Michael grinned, but there was no amusement in his eyes. "Oh, I know what I need. I need Lisa. She shouldn't have returned." David, breathing heavily, tightened his grip on the gun. "Leave before it's too late," he warned. Michael just shook his head and took a step forward. "You don't even understand what you're dealing with," he hissed. At that moment, William realized, this is not just anger, this is panic. Michael was afraid of something, or someone. "She knows too much," Michael added quietly. "And now I need to fix it." The room erupted into chaos in an instant. David clutched the gun, his face contorted with rage and his hands shaking with adrenaline. William took a cautious step forward, trying to calm him down. "David, listen to me," His voice was low but firm. "Drop your weapon. We all want the same thing, truth. Killing won't solve anything." "She knew," David shouted, shaking his head. His finger was too close to the trigger. "She could have stopped Ashley, but she didn't. How can I live with this now?" At the same moment, Michael moved. He took advantage of the moment when everyone was focused on David and rushed at William, knife flashing. The blade flashed in the air, and William barely had time to step back when the sharp steel slashed his arm. "Crap!" he roared, feeling a hot pain shoot through his forearm. David jerked sharply in surprise, but the gun remained in his hands. Jessica screamed, retreating into the corner, her eyes darting between the men. William grabbed the nearest chair and, using all his strength, hit Michael in the chest. He staggered, but did not fall. His face twisted into a mad grin. "Do you think you can stop me?" Michael wheezed, clutching the knife even tighter. "You have no idea who you're messing with." "Fuck you," William barked, rushing forward. At this moment, David, shaking with anger, suddenly turned the gun on Michael. His fingers clenched the handle convulsively. "It's your fault," he whispered. "All this is because of you." "David, no!" Jessica shouted. Everything happened in a split second. In the confusion, in the tangle of bodies, sounds, and chaos, the first shot rang out. Michael froze, his eyes widening in surprise. He slowly lowered his gaze to his chest, where a dark spot was blurring. His lips trembled, but he didn't have time to say a word. His legs gave way, and he collapsed on the floor. The silence lasted for a moment, and then a hoarse, ragged breath echoed through the room. But before anyone could realize what had happened, a second shot was fired. William felt a hot pain shoot through his back. The world began to spin. The sound of the gunshot turned into a dull ringing in my ears. His legs gave way, and he fell heavily to the floor, unable to feel his limbs. The cold began to rapidly cover his body. "William," Jessica screamed, rushing towards him. David stood with the gun in his hand, his breathing harsh and uneven. There was horror in his eyes at what he had just done. He took a step back, then another. "Damn," he whispered, then, without looking back, he rushed towards the door. Jessica pressed her hands to William's bleeding wound. "Hold on. Can you hear me?" Her voice trembled. Tears flowed down her cheeks. But William's consciousness was rapidly fading. The last thing he heard before darkness swallowed him was her desperate cry. The flickering light of fluorescent lamps hurt my eyes. The air smelled of antiseptics, cold and something metallic. William slowly opened his eyelids, feeling heaviness throughout his body. He tried to move, but something was wrong. "You've woken up," a soft voice said. He turned his head and saw a doctor in a white coat in front of him. A woman of about 50 with a kind but tired face watched him carefully. "How do you feel?" William tried to speak, but his throat was dry. He swallowed and whispered hoarsely, "Where am I? What happened?" The doctor approached, adjusting the Roman 4. "You are in the hospital. You were brought here 3 days ago with a severe gunshot wound. The operation was successful, but—" She hesitated, as if searching for words. "Sorry, detective, but you have serious spinal damage." William frowned. Pain pierced my head, but my heart sank even more from a bad feeling. "What does it mean?" His voice sounded weaker than he intended. The woman lowered her eyes and fell silent for a second. "This means that below the belt, you no longer have sensitivity. We did our best, but the damage was too severe." Silence. The words echoed in his head. He blinked, trying to comprehend what he had heard. My whole body was filled with lead. My thoughts were confused. Was this a dream? No, it was reality. Wrong, cruel, alien. "No," he whispered. No." The doctor sighed heavily. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He stared at the ceiling, trying to breathe evenly. Hands clenched into fists. He tried to move his legs, but his body did not respond. Panic rolled in like a wave. "Will I be able to walk?" he said with difficulty. "We can't say for sure. Rehabilitation will take a lot of time, but most likely there will not be a complete recovery. The doctor said carefully, "But you are alive, William. And this is the main thing." He clenched his teeth, feeling not fear growing in his chest, but cold despair. Alive? What's the point now? At that moment, Jessica entered the room. Her eyes are swollen, her face is pale, as if she had not slept all these 3 days. Seeing that he had woken up, she froze, and then stepped towards him, sitting on the edge of the bed. "William," her voice trembled. "How are you?" He wanted to get angry and scream, but he couldn't. He just exhaled heavily. "David," he finally squeezed out. "Where is he?" Jessica shook her head. "He escaped. They are looking for him, but so far to no avail. You, you are the main witness. But I'm just glad you're alive." "Michael," he squeezed out. She looked away. "He's dead. The bullet hit right in the heart. He died instantly." Silence fell again in the room. William closed his eyes. He remembered the chaos of that night, flashes of pain, fear, and now complete powerlessness. He tried to pull himself together, but the future seemed foggy, filled only with the walls of the hospital and a sense of loss. Jessica covered his hand with hers. "You are not alone, William. We can handle it." But he wasn't sure it was true. William heard her sobs even before he fully woke up. Muffled, desperate sounds, as if she was trying to hold them back, but could not. He slowly opened his eyes. In the darkened room, Jessica was sitting by his bed. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "Jess." His voice was weak, but he mustered all his strength to call out to her. She raised her head sharply, her eyes were red, and her face was drawn. For several seconds, she simply looked at him, as if not believing that he had actually woken up. "William," she whispered, sobbing, "I'm sorry. I should have told you everything earlier." He frowned, trying to concentrate despite the dull pain in his body. "What are you talking about?" He swallowed, and then added, more confidently, "What were you hiding?" Jessica sighed heavily, wiped away her tears with trembling fingers, and looked straight into his eyes. "I worked with Ashley. We were investigating Michael's crimes." Her voice trembled, but there was also relief in it. "We found out that he is connected with the disappearances of people. He eliminated everyone who became a threat to him." William blinked. The information settled in my mind slowly, like pieces of a mosaic that finally began to fit together. "So," he clenched his fists, despite his weakness, "you knew all this time?" Jessica cringed as if struck. "I tried to protect you," she whispered, "but everything went wrong. Ashley died. David, he—" She began to sob again, and William felt anger mixed with pain flare up in his chest. Everything he knew, his entire reality, was crumbling. But did he now have a choice but to accept the truth? William had a hard time digesting what was said. His gaze darted across the ceiling of the chamber, and a storm raged inside. All along, Jessica was not a traitor, but someone playing a deadly game. Were you spying on Michael?" He finally squeezed out, not believing his ears. Jessica nodded nervously, her hands clenched into fists in her lap. "Yes," her voice was hoarse from tears. "Ashley came to me a few months ago. She already knew that Michael was dangerous, but she needed proof. She asked me to help. And you agreed?" William could barely contain his anger. "You didn't even think to tell me." "How?" Her voice trembled. "How could I? You already suspected me of treason then, and if I said that I was following him, would you believe it? Or would you think I was just covering for myself?" He clenched his teeth. She was right. At that moment, he was blinded by jealousy and anger. His own emotions played against him. "How far have you come?" he asked after a heavy pause. Jessica swallowed. "Far enough to know that Ashley was right. I saw how he met people who then disappeared without a trace. I overheard conversations in which he talked about fixing problems. I found the documents, but I was missing something that could tie everything together. Ashley wanted to find that last piece of the puzzle, and she paid for it with her life." "What kind of documents?" William stood up, despite his weakness. Jessica shook her head. financial transaction records supporting transfers to accounts associated with shell companies. Michael didn't just hide his activities, he financed them. He used these companies to pay for his work to eliminate undesirables. We thought that if we collected more data, we could pass it on to the police, but it turned out to be much more complicated. William ran his hand over his face, trying to comprehend the full depth of what was happening. "So what now?" he asked, trying not to show his growing anxiety. Jessica smiled bitterly. "Michael is dead now, but that doesn't mean it's over. The people he worked with are still at large. They will not allow anyone to expose their system." William looked at her, and everything went cold inside. "So you're still in danger?" She nodded. "I know, but now at least I'm not alone." William peered into Jessica's face, trying to catch even a shadow of a lie. But now, when all the cards were on the table, he realized she was silent not out of guilt, but out of fear. "A note." His voice was low, almost hoarse. "It wasn't from Michael. It was from Lisa, wasn't it?" Jessica lowered her head, her fingers trembling. "Yes," she admitted barely audibly. "Lisa tried to warn me. She wanted to meet, to tell the truth, but I was afraid. Afraid that if you found out, you would also become a target. Like Ashley." William clenched his fists. His heart was beating faster, and one thought was pulsating in his head. Jessica had been trying to protect him all this time. "Didn't you think that I could help you?" he asked bitterly. "Instead, you left me in the dark, making me think you betrayed me." Jessica raised her head, her eyes filled with pain. "I couldn't lose you, William. I saw what happened to Ashley. I knew that Michael and his people would stop at nothing. They remove everyone who gets in their way. I couldn't let you be next." He took a deep breath, trying to cope with the surging emotions. How much has become clearer, but the fear for Jessica has only intensified. If Michael's organization is still active, then their enemies have not disappeared. "Where is Lisa now?" he asked, looking her straight in the eyes. Jessica froze, then slowly shook her head. "I don't know. She said she had a plan, that she had proof. But after that meeting, she disappeared. I tried to find her, but she seemed to have disappeared." An alarming chill ran down William's spine. If Lisa disappeared, it meant only one thing. The game was not over yet, and he was not going to stay away. The first days in the rehabilitation center were unbearable. William has always been accustomed to relying on his body, on strength, on the ability to control the situation. Now he was confined to a wheelchair, and every movement, every new day reminded him that he was no longer the same person he was before. But physical pain was nothing compared to the burden of questions that haunted him. Michael is dead. David ran away. Lisa is missing. But the truth still eluded him, leaving only guesses and fears in its place. Every morning started the same. William woke up to the sounds of the corridor, the heavy steps of the staff, the muffled voices of patients, the smell of antiseptic. He gritted his teeth as the physical therapist helped him into the chair. Every movement was difficult, but he did not allow himself to complain. "You're making progress," the nurse said when he, gathering all his will into a fist, managed to move his left leg a little. "Yeah, good luck," he muttered, looking out the window. But on this day, something much more unexpected awaited him than the next stage of therapy. Jessica came to see him after lunch. She looked tired, but there was concern in her eyes. "We have a problem," she said by way of greeting. William immediately became wary. "What's happened?" She took a deep breath, sat down opposite him, and placed a folder in front of him. "The police have received the results of DNA testing in Ashley's case." She paused. "And Michael didn't kill her." These words sounded like a bolt from the blue. William froze, his fingers gripping the armrests of his chair. "What did you say?" "The DNA found at the crime scene does not belong to him. He wasn't there that night. Michael may have been involved in many dirty deeds, but Ashley's murder was not one of them. The world has turned upside down again. Everything he knew, everything he fought for, turned out to be a lie again. It's impossible," he whispered. "Then who?" Jessica shook her head. "The police don't know yet. But this means the real killer is still at large. William slowly ran his hand over his face. The new reality hit him with renewed force. Damn, he breathed. So we were chasing the wrong person all along. Jessica squeezed his hand. This is not the end, William. But now we need to start again. William was still shocked by the results of the examination. All this time he was sure that Michael was the same killer, that it was he who took Ashley's life. But now the reality turned out to be much more complicated. This meant that the real culprit was still at large. Every day in the hospital room, he went over the details in his head, trying to put the picture back together. If not Michael, then who? Who could want Ashley dead? Who had access to it and motive? The answer was right in front of him, but he refused to see it, until he received a new report. The next morning, Detective Harris came to see him. He looked gloomy and was holding a folder with documents in his hands. He sat down on the chair opposite William and was silent for a long time before speaking. "We have news," he finally said. "I'm not sure you're ready for this." "Just say it," William managed. Harris opened the folder, flipped through a few pages, and pulled out one of them. David Morris. DNA found at the crime scene matches his sample. Time has slowed down. William felt his insides tighten. "David," he asked again, as if he couldn't believe his ears. Harris nodded. His blood was at the crime scene. He was there that night. William closed his eyes, remembering all their conversations, all their meetings. David always seemed like a heartbroken husband, a desperate man who was looking for justice. And now he turned out to be the killer of his own wife. "Damn," William whispered. "He set Michael up." "Exactly," Harris confirmed. He knew about Michael's reputation, about his affairs, dark connections. It was easy for him to use it. He made sure that all the evidence led to him. It was a carefully planned move. William gritted his teeth. It explained so much. Explained why David was so zealous in blaming Jessica, why he was so angry, why he shot him that night. "Motive?" William asked, although he already knew the answer. He thought Ashley cheated on him. Harris smiled bitterly. "We found her correspondence. There are messages there that could be understood in two ways. David, apparently, was sure that she was having an affair. But she didn't have one," William said quietly. "No," Harris confirmed. "But that was enough for him to kill her." The silence in the room became unbearable. Everything that seemed clear was now turned upside down. "Where is he now?" William asked sharply. Harris sighed wearily. "We don't know yet. He disappeared, but now we have a warrant, and we will find him." William clenched his fists. He couldn't sit still. David was more than just a fugitive. He was a murderer who should not go unpunished. The truth about Michael turned out to be much more complicated than it seemed at first glance. In the weeks following his death, police continued to delve into his past, uncovering layer upon layer of criminal schemes in which he was involved. However, despite his reputation and connections with criminal elements, it soon became obvious that murder was not his method. According to discovered documents and witness statements, Michael worked for an underground organization that specialized in blackmail and manipulation of influential people. His role was simple but effective. He collected dirt on wealthy clients and then used this information to force them to carry out the necessary orders. Money, power, services, all this turned into a tool of control. The police discovered an entire archive of incriminating materials, hidden recordings of conversations, photographs, bank transfers, and even fake contracts. Michael didn't kill people, but he ruined their lives by forcing them to obey his shadowy superiors. According to the investigation, Michael acted extremely carefully. He used front men to transmit incriminating evidence, communicated only through encrypted channels, and never left direct traces. His contacts in the highest echelons of government and business allowed him to remain invisible for many years. His most common method of operation was to collect incriminating evidence through elite clubs and private parties. Rich and influential people were invited there, and among them there were always those who succumbed to temptation. Michael knew how to find weaknesses in people and use them to his advantage. The organization for which Michael worked turned out to be more than just a network of blackmailers. It was a structure deeply integrated into political and economic circles. Their activities extended far beyond the boundaries of one city. Offshore accounts, information trading, influence on major tenders, and political appointments. Michael performed one of the key roles. He not only collected incriminating evidence, but also coordinated the work of the agents, monitored their safety, and ensured that the victims of blackmail would not be able to escape the trap. It's now clear why Ashley was targeted. She's learned too much. Perhaps she accidentally stumbled upon information that threatened the entire system. Or she had a personal motive. Someone from her circle became a victim of Michael. The fact remains, Michael was involved in dark affairs, but his crimes were not related to murder, but to manipulation and control. Perhaps he himself became a pawn in the game of more powerful people. And now that he was dead, one question remained: who would take his place? William sat in a chair by the window of the hospital room, looking out at the gray cityscape. It was raining outside the window, drops flowing down the glass in thin, winding paths, as if a reflection of his own thoughts. He felt empty, crushed, as if part of himself had disappeared along with Michael. He was wrong. He's been chasing the wrong person all this time. He believed that Michael was a killer. He allowed his emotions to override logic, allowed jealousy and suspicion to blind him. He spent weeks, months on the chase, searching for evidence that would confirm his version. But in the end, Michael turned out to be just a tool in the hands of more powerful people. And the real criminal, the man who really killed Ashley, was there all along. David, husband of the murdered woman. The man who cried over her body, screamed for justice, blamed others. He turned out to be a murderer. Everything that seemed undeniable suddenly fell apart like a house of cards. William remembered every moment when David seemed broken, heartbroken. All their conversations, looks, emotions that he shared. How could he, a professional detective, overlook the truth? William ran his hands over his face. Bitterness welled up inside. This was not just a professional mistake. It was a failure that cost him too much. People's lives, his own health, trust in yourself. He felt rage growing inside, mixed with powerlessness. If he had not been so blinded by his jealousy, if he had analyzed the evidence soberly and not under the pressure of emotions, perhaps Ashley would be alive. Perhaps he wouldn't have found himself in that hospital room, chained to a chair, with the prospect of never walking again. Every movement was difficult, but he did not allow himself to complain. The days merged into monotony. Doctors, nurses, physical therapy, normal mode for those who have lost control of their body. But the loss of control over his mind was what truly destroyed him. Jessica entered the room, quietly closing the door behind her. She looked tired. Her eyes were red from sleepless nights. She glanced at him, noticing how tightly he was gripping the arms of his chair. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, coming closer. He didn't turn around, continuing to look out the window. "Then I screwed up," he answered quietly. "I was chasing the wrong person, Jess. Michael was a scoundrel, but not a murderer. And I let my personal feelings overshadow everything else." Jessica sat down next to him and took his hand. Her fingers were warm, reassuring. "You couldn't know. You had the evidence, the logic. You did everything you could." "Don't tell me that," he snapped, finally turning to her. Pain was reflected in his eyes. "I should have seen more. I should have thought more broadly. Instead, I acted like a jealous husband, not like a detective." "You are human, William," Jessica said softly. "Even the best detectives make mistakes." He smiled bitterly. "Yes, but usually mistakes don't cost them everything. I lost more than just my business. I lost control of my own life." Jessica covered his hand with hers. "You haven't lost me," she whispered. He looked at her. There was no condemnation in her eyes, only sincerity. She didn't blame him as much as he blamed himself. "We can't change the past, William, but we can deal with the present." He nodded, sighing heavily. He didn't know if he would ever forgive himself for this failure. But one thing was clear: Now he will do everything to correct his mistakes. William sat on the hospital bed, looking at his motionless legs. The time dragged on painfully long, but he was already used to it. He knew that he had to learn to live in a new way, but the fear of the future did not disappear. Thoughts about his mistakes haunted him, giving him no rest. He remembered every moment he doubted Jessica, every time he allowed suspicion to poison their relationship. Jessica entered the room, quietly closing the door behind her. She looked tired, but there was no longer the same fear in her eyes, just determination. She sat down opposite him, folding her hands in her lap, and just looked at him for a few seconds. Her lips trembled slightly, but she tried to remain calm. "We need to talk," she finally said. William sighed and nodded. He felt that this conversation was inevitable. "Yes," he said slowly, "they should have been a long time ago." There was a pause, filled only by the faint hum of hospital equipment. More was said in that silence than in the hundreds of words they had exchanged over the past weeks. "I want you to know." Jessica swallowed before continuing. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you the truth right away. I'm sorry that I hid all this. I was afraid to trust you." William looked at her carefully. He knew she was sincere. There was remorse in her voice, but also hope. "And I'm sorry that I allowed jealousy to take over my reason," he admitted. "I was sure that you betrayed me. I saw only what I wanted to see and did not try to understand you." Jessica lowered her head, her fingers clenching into fists nervously. "It's my fault, too. I was afraid that if you found out, you'd become a target. I thought I was protecting you. I tried to deal with it myself, but it got out of control. I didn't know how to explain to you." "But you shouldn't have done it alone," William said softly. "We were a team. We had to get through this together. Instead, we became strangers, hiding the truth from each other." She raised her eyes, and there was so much pain and regret in them. "I didn't want you to suffer," she whispered, "but it seems to me that I only made it worse." He covered her hand with his and squeezed her fingers. There was no longer anger in his eyes, only fatigue and understanding. "You wanted to protect me, and I wanted to protect you. We both ended up getting lost," he said. "But now I want to know everything. No secrets, no omissions." Jessica took a deep breath and nodded. "I promise. No more secrets." "Then we can handle it," William said quietly. "Together." She nodded, holding back tears. For the first time in a long time, there was no mistrust between them. Only frankness and hope that their story is not over yet. William never thought that one day he would find himself in this position. He was used to being strong and in control of the situation, but now his world had narrowed to hospital walls and endless procedures. Every day began the same way. Nurses helped him move into a chair, a physiotherapist patiently encouraged him, and the muscles that had previously worked flawlessly refused to obey. Simple things that previously seemed natural to him now became inaccessible. He couldn't even roll over in bed on his own, let alone stand up. At first, he refused to accept the new reality. Anger, despair, powerlessness, everything mixed inside him, turning every attempt to move into a test. He hated his weakness, hated the look of sympathy in the eyes of the doctors and staff. But most of all, he hated fear. Fear that he will never get back on his feet. Fear that the life he knew was over. That he will no longer be able to protect himself, help someone, be independent. Jessica was nearby, always. She held his hand as he attempted his first independent maneuver in a wheelchair. She picked him up from the floor when he fell, stubbornly refusing to call the nurses. She endured his outbursts of irritation, his rudeness, his silent anger. And every time he pushed her away, she just stayed there. "I won't leave you, William," she said one day when he threw his glass on the floor in despair, unable to hold it. "I will be with you, even if you don't want it." He looked at her, feeling something inside him breaking. For the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to cry. These tears were not only from pain, but also from the realization that he was not alone. Despite all his mistakes, Jessica is still around. Weeks passed. His arms became stronger. He learned to balance, move along the hospital corridors, and then go outside. Doctors offered him the opportunity to try an exoskeleton, a special support system that allows him to move if the residual motor skills of the muscles allow it. The first attempts were painful. He couldn't keep his balance, his legs were shaking, his muscles seemed to protest against every movement. Sweat ran down his forehead, and anger accumulated in his chest at himself, at the world, at this whole situation. But Jessica held his hand and did not let go. "William, you can do it," she said. "I know you can." He tried, time after time. I suffered failures, fell, lost hope, but got up again. The nurses helped him, the physical therapists patiently explained every movement, but only Jessica could give him real motivation. He saw the way she looked at him and couldn't afford to give up. When he first managed to stay on his feet, his body trembled with tension, but it didn't matter anymore. He stood. Even if only for a few seconds, even with support, he stood. "You did it," Jessica whispered, hugging him. "I knew you could handle it." Her voice trembled, and he realized how important this moment was not only for him, but also for her. She experienced every second with him, every pain, every despair. This was just the first step. But he knew that with her next to him, he would find the strength to move on. Now he no longer just existed, he fought for his new life. And this fight was just beginning. Every day started the same. Jessica showed up in William's hospital room with a stack of fresh documents, printouts, and a laptop. Now that his body was recovering and his mind was in dire need of something to do, they continued the investigation together. "We need to deal with new evidence," she said one day, laying out photographs and printed reports in front of him. The police reviewed the case after the results of the examination. Now they understand that Michael was not a murderer, but a pawn in someone else's game. William, although sitting in a wheelchair, felt much better than in the first days after the injury. Work gave him meaning back. He was back in business. He could control something again. "I want to see the interrogation reports," he said, holding out his hand to the documents. "If David planned everything, then there were mistakes that we can find." Jessica nodded and opened her laptop. They worked together, exchanging guesses, analyzing new data. She recorded his thoughts, helped contact the police, and asked questions to witnesses. They became a real team. "It's strange, but it seems to me that it was meant to be," Jessica said thoughtfully one evening, leaning back in her chair. "We've always worked alone, but now we know that together we are stronger," William finished for her, smiling. She smiled back. For the first time in a long time, he felt like they were on the same side again. Several weeks passed, but there were still no results from David's search. It seemed as if he had disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only chaos and questions. The police checked all possible leads, but each time they came up with a dead end. William and Jessica continued to collaborate with detectives, analyzing old evidence and building new theories. However, every day without news only increased the tension. The main question remained, where is David? And suddenly he appeared himself. It happened unexpectedly. A man wearing a simple dark jacket entered the police station. His face was haggard, his eyes were red, and his movements were slow and deliberate. He walked to the front desk and, without taking his eyes off the officer on duty, said quietly, "I need to talk to Detective Harris. I want to confess." The duty officer immediately became wary, but when he saw who was in front of him, he froze for a moment. David Morris, the man they had been looking for weeks, came to them himself. An hour later, in the interrogation room, Detective Harris and William sat in front of him. Jessica watched through the one-way glass, her heart pounding. David looked tired, broken. "Why did you come?" William asked quietly. David sighed, ran his hand over his face, and looked straight at him. "Because I can't live with this anymore. I'm tired of running, and I'm ready to tell you everything." David sat in the interrogation room, his hands shaking and his eyes staring into emptiness. He took a deep breath, as if gathering strength, and spoke. "I worked a lot. Constant business trips, delays at the office. I thought I was doing this for the sake of my family, for Ashley and me. But at some point, I began to notice that she had changed. She began to leave the house more often, stay late, and disappear with her friends. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but inside I was gnawed by anxiety. He paused for a second, rubbed his temples, and continued. One day, I received an anonymous message. There was a photo in it. Ashley was at the bar, laughing, her hand on Michael's shoulder. They looked close. I don't remember how many times I looked at this photo. Each time it seemed to me that this was a confirmation of my worst fears. I was filled with anger, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I tried to talk to her, but she avoided the topic, saying that everything was fine. David clenched his fists and his voice became quieter. I started following her. Every step she took, every call, every message on the phone seemed suspicious to me. I checked her phone, looked for evidence, and tried to catch something in her voice. And then one late night, I saw her leaving the restaurant with Michael. They hugged. I don't know if it was a friendly hug or something more, but at that moment I broke down. Only one thought throbbed in my head. She betrayed me. He closed his eyes and exhaled heavily. I didn't mean to kill her that night. I wanted to talk, to demand an explanation. But when I saw her, she was lying to me again. I knew it. We had a fight. She said that she was tired of my suspicions that I myself was ruining our marriage. And then, everything happened too quickly. I don't remember how I grabbed it. I don't remember how it turned into a fight. I screamed, she screamed. At some point, my hands squeezed her throat. I wanted her to shut up, for her to tell me the truth. But I didn't stop. I didn't notice how her body went limp, how her breathing became intermittent, and then disappeared completely. I unclenched my fingers, but it was too late. The next second, there was silence. His voice wavered, and he ran a hand over his face, as if trying to erase the memory. I stood over her and couldn't believe what happened. I wanted to turn back time to stop myself, but it was already too late. I leaned over, shook her by the shoulders, tried to hear at least one sigh, but she did not move. The cold began to cover me from the inside. I knew this was the end. David closed his eyes and then continued. Panic washed over me like a wave. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to call an ambulance, but I was afraid. I was afraid that I would be accused, that I would be imprisoned. I didn't want to kill her. I loved her, but everything got out of control. He took a deep breath, his shoulders shaking with pent-up emotion. At that moment, I realized that if I was arrested, no one would know the truth. I had to get rid of suspicions. Therefore, I decided to direct the investigation along the wrong path. I knew about Michael's connections, about how others looked at him. Everyone thought he was a dangerous man, and this was my opportunity. I planted evidence. I made everything point to him. I thought it would work, that I could get away with it. David fell silent, clenching his hands into fists. A heavy silence hung in the room. Nobody interrupted him. He needed to finish the conversation. I lived with this feeling every day, he continued in a hoarse voice. I tried to convince myself that I did the right thing, that it will be better this way, but with every minute the fear grew. I couldn't sleep. It seemed to me that Ashley was standing next to me, that she was looking at me. I heard her voice even when I was alone. It felt like the walls were closing in around me. I couldn't live with this. He looked at William, his eyes shining with tears. I came because I can't stand it anymore. I'm guilty, and I am ready to answer for it. The court hearing took place in a large hall filled with the dull hum of conversations. Reporters, family, former friends, and colleagues are all here to see David Morris answer for what he did. He sat in the center of the hall, handcuffed. His face was drawn, his eyes were empty, as if he had long ago stopped hoping for anything. William and Jessica took seats in the front rows. He was still getting used to his new way of life, moving in a wheelchair, but this did not stop him from closely monitoring what was happening. This was the final chord in Ashley's case. The judge announced the start of the hearing, and the prosecutor began to speak. Defendant David Morris is accused of murdering his wife, Ashley Morris, as well as the premeditated murder of Michael, whom he shot and killed in a targeted attack. After that, he tried to stage the crime, directing the investigation along the wrong path, planting evidence that pointed to Michael as responsible for Ashley's death. David listened without looking up. When asked to testify, he stood up slowly. There was silence in the hall. "I'm guilty," he said quietly. "I'm not trying to make excuses. I can't give her back. I can't change what I did. All I can do is accept the punishment." The judge nodded and looked around the room. "Do you plead guilty to all the charges brought against you?" "Yes." David's voice was full of bitterness. "I admit it." Jessica squeezed William's hand. Now it was truly coming to an end. William was sitting in the park on his usual bench, where he now came every day. Nature seemed not to notice all the nightmares that had happened in recent months. Tree branches swayed quietly in the wind, and autumn leaves slowly swirled in the air, settling on the wet ground. He waited, and soon she appeared. Lisa walked slowly, clutching a small bag to her chest. Her look was tired, but there was relief in her eyes. When she came closer, she froze for a second, as if not knowing where to start the conversation. "Hello," she said quietly. "Hello, Lisa," William replied, watching her intently. "You're leaving." She nodded, looking down. "Yes, there's nothing left for me to do here. Everything that connected me with this city is in the past." William understood her. After everything she'd been through, Lisa deserved a chance to start over. She lost a lot, but at least not her life. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I don't know yet. Maybe to another state, maybe overseas. The main thing is to stay away from here. I've lived with the ghosts of the past for too long." There was silence. Lisa sighed heavily and took a step forward. "I want to thank you, William, for not giving up, for getting to the bottom of the truth. I know it cost you dearly." "I did what I had to do," he said. "For Ashley, for all of us." She nodded, then suddenly hugged him. Her hug was short, but a lot was felt in it: gratitude, farewell, regret. "Take care of yourself," she whispered. "You too, Lisa," he replied. She turned around and slowly walked away. William watched her go until her figure disappeared among the trees. He knew that he would most likely never see her again, but perhaps it was better this way. When Lisa was out of sight, William remained sitting on the bench, letting the last moments of their meeting settle in his mind. The wind swayed the branches of the trees, reminding him of change, that life goes on. He remembered her face, her strength, her pain. She left, leaving the past behind her, and he stayed to move on, to try to find meaning in what lay ahead. He ran his hand over his face, driving away heavy thoughts. Perhaps someday he too will decide to leave this city, but not now. Now he had another task: to collect the pieces of his life and start anew. The phone vibrated in my pocket. Message from Jessica. "Where are you? Is everything okay?" He looked at the screen, smiled at the corner of his lips, and typed the answer. "Yes, just saying goodbye to the past a little. I'll be there soon." Taking a deep breath, he turned the stroller around and headed out of the park. Life went on. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.